looking now at the non-negotiables that employee experience leaders should focus on, I think, and I don't want to direct the conversation too much, but I wonder if you could touch on a little bit more around the DEI and the gender-based violence, sexual harassment, because I think this is a non-negotiable that has to start coming out in this space, and I know you're passionate about it. So what is your opinion around that and other non-negotiables that you think EX leaders need to look at?
Yeah, so we've now gone and made into law an act within the employment equity space around harassment in the workplace, right? Yeah. And I think promulgating laws and prescripts, that's the easy part. It's essentially how do you put those in place? Because if we look at South Africa as a whole, if you look at all of our acts and our laws, especially post-1994, very good legislation there.
Progressive, yeah.
Very good pieces of legislation. My goodness, quite impressive. It's all in the application where things fall short. So if we look at gender-based violence within the scope of DE&I, a multi-sectoral approach is important. We cannot just look at it as a one-dimensional. It's fluid, it's forever moving, and we need the participants of multiple key stakeholders to make it happen.
Yeah.
So if we look at gender-based violence just as a focus area for corporate South Africa and other institutions, it needs to be included in the culture and how we do things around here. If I look at our business, when we talk about gender-based violence, we're saying we want to ensure that we approach a zero tolerance stance and nobody feels unsafe. But we shouldn't forget that in that environment, you've also got perpetrators there. So you cannot just focus on the survivors. You need to focus on what do you do with the perpetrators? How do you rehabilitate the perpetrators of gender-based violence? But you also need then to do an analysis and pinpoint the risks. How do you pinpoint who the perpetrators are? How do you even go about doing that? So there's an analysis that needs to happen and a risk assessment that needs to take place to point you in the right direction. What we've been doing for the most part in corporate South Africa is to support the survivors of gender-based violence. Obviously, it's the right thing to do. But I think where our efforts fall short is that we support them in the working environment and we send them back to the toxic broader environment.
Yeah.
Somebody who is experiencing gender-based violence at home comes to work, they're safe. But before they can get out of that environment, they go back to that same toxic environment.
Yeah.
When they manage to get out, protection orders don't work and whatnot. So we need, the policing system. We need an efficient policing system to overlay all of this, to aid corporate South Africa. We need a justice system that will work very fast in order to make sure that these cases are brought to book. So even when a survivor manages to leave a toxic environment, we've known of cases where they are stopped and they are harassed by the perpetrator because the law is just not efficient enough for them to book. So we need that multi-sectoral approach. But it doesn't mean we must sit and wait for all the other pieces to work.
Yeah.
From a company point of view, saying we take a zero tolerance stance is one thing, but actually making sure that we're taking a zero tolerance stance is another. And that's where also the application comes in. We've now got an updated act around harassment, which means as employers, we've got the obligation when we are told to investigate as soon as possible. We've got the obligation to look into these things as soon as possible. As custodians of the policy in, the human capital or employee experience space, we've got the obligation to know that we are not to appease those who come and say, I'm feeling unsafe. We've also got then the obligation to drive a continuous education and awareness campaign around what does this mean for me as an employee. So, and this campaign must also always be driving the fact that it is safe for you in this environment.
Yeah.
It must overlay all of that. It must overlay all the efforts to say, above all else, this is a safe space for you. This is a space where you belong and you are included in that particular space.
And I mean, what is your viewpoint then on how transparent organizations should be in terms of of dealing with accusations, because I mean, when we look at the safety aspect of it, most people that are victims are mostly afraid to speak up because they fear the persecution, obviously. And I mean, there's a lot of gender bias and things that we can, you know, we obviously all know about, but you know, I mean, I think a lack of transparency and a lack of trust that something will happen is, you know, is often the reason why people don't speak up. So what do you think? I mean, that's very difficult then to then put out and to say this person, potentially a person in power, is a perpetrator and has been taken to task and has been prosecuted or removed from the company. You know, how open do you think companies are going to have to be about that? I mean, it's quite a difficult subject.
It is very difficult. It's a very difficult one, because we are also operating from a stance of innocent until proven guilty. Absolutely. and whatnot, right? I think if we're staying within the ambit of the law, you know, we can manage the transparency. However, we do also, like you said, we want to build trust in the system. We want our employees to trust that the process and the system we've put in place, especially to report and to ventilate, they're systems that, you know, they can trust, they can use, and they won't be victimized. That's the one part. But the system must also cater for the fact that sometimes there are false accusations.
Of course.
How do you then deal with it? So that transparency bit must also be operated within the ambit of, without making the one who is reporting to feel like they shouldn't be reporting, but also following the innocent until proven guilty. You need to strike some sort of balance there, but put it out there that we will investigate because we have a zero tolerance stance. And if there are false accusations, the consequences, there has to be consequences.
Yes, agreed.
Because you also want to display the fact that we will also not, because that is a form of harassment if you falsely accuse someone. That is harassment. So there has to be consequences either way. Now, in terms of, do we need to be outright transparent? It is a tricky one. It is a tricky one. And I think it is probably a journey, because it also relies on the environment within which we're operating in as South Africa. The broader environment. Like I said, the other key stakeholders need to be working efficiently for everything else, you know, to work, because you go maybe and you be transparent about the internal process that you have followed, and the external process exonerates that person. What happens? You know, So I know I haven't given you an answer, but I'm just,
I don't think there is one.
The complexities.
I don't think there is one. And I mean, I think, you know, even if we look at the, you know, what's happening in that, to train our leaders or our coaches or whatever, to also the sensitivity, the bias training around that, the skill set to assist somebody that is in a toxic environment and doesn't know how to leave, to be able to empower them. That is, you know, now we're moving into a real sort of, you know, psychological counseling space, which is really, you know, not what necessarily everybody signed up for. So it's very nuanced and very difficult. And so off the back of that, I mean, what do you think around like you know, like how EAP systems and those sort of things at the moment are going to have to alter or change or shift to be able to support some more of these nuances?
So maybe before I touch on those nuances, just at the back of the comment that you made around training, you know, managers and the like, you know, it's one of those skill sets that we need to now hone in as organizations, to say, managers, people, leaders, human capital, that skill set around compassion and empathy is something that needs to be trained, because now part of the role of a manager is to create a sense of psychological safety. They are not therapists, but they need to create psychological safety, and we need to be able to train them to say, here's a toolkit, here's how you handle the situation, here's where you hand over, and here's how you hand over, right? But you are training people who come, like you said, with their own biases, their own unconscious bias. So you need to deal with that unconscious bias first before you take them through a toolkit. You can't just give them a toolkit, because you could be giving a toolkit to somebody who's a perpetrator
Yeah.
or somebody who's been a survivor of gender-based violence, but has not dealt with it properly.
Yeah.
So there are conversations and ventilations that need to happen prior to you saying, okay, now here you go, here's the toolkit. And I know that most organizations, we do the toolkit, we do the road shows, the trainings and whatnot, but we are probably landing all of this on very wounded people, very broken people.
Yeah.
Right. So something to think about. Now,
Yeah.
EAP has always been used as an organization, as organizations as a crutch. Because prior to probably the pandemic, and maybe not just the pandemic, maybe let's say 10 years up to now, well-being, employee wellness was never on the strategic agenda of a business, on the business strategic agenda. It's been a human capital agenda, but even in human capital, just an appendage.
Sure.
Right. The pandemic has pronounced the importance of employee well-being, and it's put it right at the center of the business agenda. So the partnership with EAP providers needs to be different. I mean, companies would use EAP, to say, come, give us a report every quarter, who's using you, who's not. Now we need to have more deeper conversations with EAP providers to say, right, employee well-being is a strategic imperative for us. How do we structure the benefits of employee well-being in such a way that it pronounces and it elevates the agenda of employee well-being? What does employee well-being mean? What areas should we be focusing on? What are our employees saying? How do we analyze the information that we get from the reports that you give us? And what do we then focus on based on the reports that you give us on a monthly or quarterly basis? So the relationship needs to change.
Yeah.
And I think with most companies, it's now beginning to change. We no longer outsource employee well-being.
Yeah.
It's now very much insourced. And we're saying to our EAP providers, please, we need to walk the journey together.
Yeah.
We actually need to use each other as thinking partners. What do you think? What are you seeing? What should we be doing better? Instead of saying, deal with it, call ICAS or call the other EAP, whichever EAP, call them and they will sort you out. Now it's a matter of come in, let's sit around the table.
Yeah.
What does this mean for us? Yeah. So the relationship has definitely changed.
Yeah. I mean, no longer can mental health only help be provided only when there's a traumatic event. People now just what they need, they want to talk to somebody. And that is now something that they're saying, this should be part of my benefit. I should be able to speak to someone without it specifically being linked to like what is identified previously as trauma.
Yes. I must refer myself. I mustn't wait.
Yes. Yeah. Because now if it's showing up really badly. So
exactly.
Yeah.